Welcome everyone to the Inner Circle podcast. This has been something of a dream of ours for a little while to get back in front of the camera. By way of introduction, I'm Anthony and this is Michael. We're both directors of Inner Real Estate and Inner Owners Corporation. This has been a bit of a spur of the moment in some sense, but also something that brings us back to our COVID days of doing a heap of videos and sending them out to clients. So we thought we'd get a little bit more professional and get microphones and all type of stuff. But Michael, welcome.
Thanks, Anthony. Yeah, it is. It's pretty exciting doing this. We haven't really done a kind of a piece to camera and these updates that we were used to doing basically on a fortnightly basis during COVID. But we thought we'd kind of bring it up to the times a little bit more and go in a bit of a more of a podcast setup, and also start doing these a little bit more regularly as well, to provide updates on all things that are happening in property basically. Things have obviously changed a little bit since the 2021 days when we were doing those regular updates, and it was really about kind of providing updates on things that were happening at the time and the challenges that we were dealing with. But obviously a lot's changed in property, and not just in real estate, but owners corporation and everything else that goes to property as well. So we're hoping that we can bring you those updates on a regular basis here through the podcast, and look forward to providing those updates quite regularly to you.
Yep. We want it to be more long form. So we want to have a bit of fun. We don't want to I think back at like the conversations that you and I have in the car on the way into the office and stuff like that. And it's always around property. So almost bringing those conversations to this and have a bit of fun. We're not going to take ourselves, as we don't in this business, ourselves too seriously.
Yep.
So we want to be able to bring some really good information to clients, as you said, on a more regular basis. Hopefully we'll be able to get some guests if they decide if they want to come on. We've got Scandy Pick that are behind the camera today recording all this for us, and Julian was good enough to bring in some mugs, so he's our first official sponsor of that. So thank you, Julian and the Scandy Pick team. So let's get into it. So the first thing we wanted to talk about, there's some changes coming as of the 25th of November. We sent out an email out to our clients about a month or so ago. That was around these new changes that were coming, and we've got a blog on our website as well about it. But there's been so much changes over the last 5 years in the rental space, and this is just another element of that. And we've really gone to, I guess, accept those changes and see where the benefits are for our clients, both rental providers and renters, and then be able to shed some light on that. So I think what we'll do, Michael, we'll run through the 6 or so changes that have happened. We'll give some, our perspective on how it's going to impact owners, how it's going to impact renters, and then just see how the conversation sort of flows from there. But we'll get stuck into the first one, which is no more no-fault evictions. So essentially what that is meaning is that rental providers will no longer be able to end a fixed-term lease without reasons or valid grounds, such as owner occupying, major renovations, or the property for sale. And this must be clearly stated with evidence provided with the way of a sales contract or an authority or a stat deck. So, yeah.
Yeah, so I think this is something that's been coming for quite a while. So it's not something that should really come as a surprise to property managers or owners. It's something that we've seen, I suppose, the state government make decisions about moving kind of no-fault evictions away from the powers that a residential rental provider had. So the first tranche of changes that came back in 2021, they removed the no reason notice. So that was the old 120 days that you could serve on a renter, and move them out for no specific reason at all. And that could happen within any period of time that the property was tenanted. As long as they weren't on a fixed term lease, you give them 120 days notice, and that was it. So it was 4 months, and you get possession of the property back. So that was removed in 2021. There still was a end of fixed term notice that would get that you could serve on a renter, or that an owner could serve on a renter. And the purpose of that was that you'd be able to provide 90 days notice to a renter and say, look, at the end of the first fixed term, so if it's a 12-month lease, 3 months before the end of that 12-month term, you'd be able to provide them with notice, and we want possession of the property back. And you didn't have to specify a reason. In actual fact, you weren't allowed to specify a reason on that notice, because if you specified a reason on that notice, it would mean that you weren't, serving them notice for end of fixed term. You're actually doing it for another purpose. We had an interesting case happen at VCAT a couple of years ago on one of those notices. That's the 90-day end of fixed term, where it was challenged by a renter, and the renter was successful in maintaining possession of the property because it was determined by the VCAT member that the reason why they wanted possession of the property back was not in line with the notice that was actually served on the renter. So again, not really surprised that one there is going, but what it does mean is that you need to have a reason to request possession of your property back for rental providers, but also for renters, it gives you security around not getting moved out of a property for no reason. There has to be a specific reason why you can be moved out of the property, and I think you touched on a few of those there. With I'll probably go through some of those reasons if you like there in terms of what you can be served notice for.
So pretty straightforward one, owner occupier. So have a property. You've moved out, you might have lived in it, or you're wanting to move back into it. You serve a notice to vacate, which is at the end of their fixed term, or even at any point after the lease expired, to say, hey, why don't occupy this property back? And that would just come with a stat deck from the owner stating that they're wanting to move back into the property under that. Major renovations. This one here is pretty interesting. This one you have to provide quotes. You almost have to provide a project plan around what you're doing. So that is not just we're going to be changing carpets and putting it back up. That is you're doing some major renovations to the property. And again, you'd have to have some quotes that would be able to be attached with that. And then property for sale. So there was a case again. This was that ended up at VCAT, which was the served notice to vacate. It was attached a copy of the sales authority to the notice to vacate. The property we sold vacant possession. But the authority had ticked on there that it was subject to a lease. The tenant contested that on that basis and was able to remain in the property, and they had to reserve the notice getting new authority signed. So you have to be very clear and make sure that all that's been done. Another thing too is you can't redact anything either, which we can probably get into a little bit later with authorities and contracts. So just being very clear on that. So I guess it's from the property manager's side of things, you have to be really clear and vigilant on when you're serving the notice. It has to be true and correct, and then we've got all the supporting evidence to it. And then for the renters, like you said, I think it's for them it's quite good that they know they're not going to just be at the end of their fixed term lease or after 12 months just essentially booted from the property with no specific reason. There are some certainties around that. Is there anything else you want to add to sort of that one?
No, I think so. I think we've covered off on all the relevant points on that.
Yep. And then ban to rental bidding. This is something that we've never done. We've never leaned into this space at all, which was, so all forms of rental bidding are banned. So properties must be advertised for a single price, a fixed price. The rental provider or the agent cannot solicitate or accept higher offers. Ranges will no longer be permitted. We've never done ranges or anything like that. We've always been, the rental price. We give our landlords or our rental providers a clear appraisal. It's $500 a week. Advertise it at that, and then hopefully get the best applicant that applies, kind of thing. So
I think the only point there where there might be some impact happening. So where we've seen during peak periods throughout the year. So for example, in January, February, when there's a huge amount of people out there looking for properties, typically a lot of students coming in looking for properties to lease. There has been instances in the past where, because of that level of demand, someone might offer more than what the asking rent is in hopes that that's going to help them secure the property. That's actually not allowed anymore. So we can't lease a property for more than what's being advertised. So again, you spoke about the obligation on the property managers and the importance of having a property manager that understands the rules and is working in the best interest of the owner. The property manager will really need to make sure that they're pricing things to market. And if they believe that things are going to be leased for more than what others are currently being advertised for, then you need to advertise it for that price, because you can't advertise something for $500 a week, and then if someone offers $520 to help secure it, then lease it for $520. The maximum that property can be leased for is $500 per week.
Yep.
So I think it goes beyond the traditional sense of rental bidding, which is, put it up there for $500 a week and then hope that, people are going to start contesting and all of a sudden they're paying $550 a week because there's a competitive market and it almost becomes a bit of a Dutch auction. It's not that at all. It's actually going even further and saying that we can't accept a rent higher than what's being advertised online.
Do you think then there'll be properties advertised for much higher amounts in those peak times. Like landlords, when rental providers will go and it's almost test the market to see what's out there.
I think that's always existed. I think people know, and I know, in the days when I was working in property management, you would have owners ask that their property become vacant or try and time the end of a lease to be in January or February or July or August, knowing that it was a busier time. So knowing that there was going to be a bit more competition for the property available at that time. So, changing the number of months of the lease and all those sorts of things. So I think you're always going to have that kind of pricing to the market conditions. So yes, I think that might happen, and it might make people think a little bit more about pricing things correctly before they're actually advertised for lease as well, rather than just kind of, advertising it for what the current tenant's paying. I think there needs to be a little bit more time spent researching the market before an ad is advertised online.
And I'm sure this is going to happen a lot when we do this podcast. We're going to go down different tangents and completely off topic. But on that, I would say that this year, 2025, has been the most normal market that we've seen for a long time, where we've seen exactly that. We saw a huge increase in the number of properties leased and rental prices in that January, February, March period. So and then it sort of tapered off. Our days on market, extended a bit during April, May, June, which is again traditionally those quieter, really solid. July, August months where we leased. I think we had a record month in August where we leased over 40 properties in that month, which was a record for us. And then now it's a little bit like we're still, properties are leasing in a relatively quick way, but the rents have kind of come off. So not talking huge amounts, but it's that normal sort of period. So I think for rental providers, really important that if you're wanting to get max dollar, you try and aim, you get around those at the start of the year. Obviously, no, but it doesn't quite work that way sometimes. But this year's definitely one of those normal sort of years. Longer term notice periods. So this probably affects us in sales more so than anyone. So notice to vacate for rent increases and evictions have been extended from 60 days to 90 days. Now there's some huge flow-on effects on this, which we can get into. But first, I think it's so this gives renters more time to budget for change and to find a new home. Owners planning on selling will have to factor in longer settlement timelines. So we're deal in a very much of a first home buyer market. We have a lot of first home buyers that are buying properties that are tenanted. So we serve a lot of 60-day notices within the settlement period and those types of things. So that's now becoming 90 days. So essentially for an owner, if you're looking at selling your property, if you're doing you get an offer subject to finance for 14 days, you're almost looking at a 4-month settlement from the time that you get a contract signed to the date that when that property settles is probably going to be closer to 4 months now, to closer to 120 days, because you allow that sort of 15 days for the finance to be approved and then the settlement after that goes unconditional to serve that notice to vacate. That now takes planning for owners. Owners can take a little bit, also they can go to market a little bit sooner in that lease period. So if they're thinking of selling their property 8-9 months before the lease expires, that's probably now a fair enough time frame, whereas before it was more you had to wait till sort of within the last 6 months of the lease to be able to get that 60-day notice to sort of line up with the end of lease period. But that's a big one. The same as if you're looking at selling it with vacant possession, you're essentially serving 90 days and waiting 3 months before you can put the property in the market. So a lot of planning for owners around that one before they just pull the trigger and go, hey, we're going to put the property up for sale. We might get into the whole 14-day notice back part of it. But the one thing which has got the huge flow-on effects, and I'd love to get your point on this, being that you've done property management more recently than what I have, is routine inspections are done at the 3-month mark and then the 9-month mark, which is essentially 9 days before the lease expires. That is the same time that you would do your rent review at that time. So how are property managers going to get around this? You got to serve a 90-day notice, which is basically the same day that you're doing your routine inspection at the 9-month mark, and then have to shoot off a rent increase and all that type of stuff. How is that going to impact it?
So I think the rent increase can probably be done separately to the to a notice to vacate. So the rent increase changes from what I understand. And I was actually just searching that while you were talking. I don't believe they've changed. So there's still a 60-day notice on a rental increase, which is good. But yeah, I think you've touched on an important point. So the reason why and the reason for timing around those routine inspections was done when the notice periods that existed on properties were what they were. So when the original Tenancy Act was drafted back in the 80s, there were certain rules put in place around the regularity of routine inspections, how much notice you needed to provide to a renter for a rental increase, same as I suppose notice periods for moving tenants on. And I suppose in the worst case scenario, what it was designed to do was that you have a new tenant move in 3 months after the new tenant moves in or new renter moves in. You've got a 3-month routine inspection, and then you're entitled to do one 6 months after that. On pure reading of the Act, it's 3 months and then 6 months later, which is at the 9-month mark. Based on the numbers, that would mean that you're about 90 days out from the end of the tenancy, and 90 days gives you enough opportunity to decide whether you want the renter to remain in the property, and that might be for a range of different reasons because of at the time it was if the property's not being maintained well or they're not happy with the condition or whatever it might be. They would then serve an end of fixed term notice, which was the 90-day notice that you could serve. Or if you're really concerned, you could actually serve them a notice much sooner, which was the 120-day notice, and just get possession of the property back. Now, obviously, with those two, I suppose, notices having been removed from the rental provider, the frequency of those routine inspections probably becomes less relevant now because it doesn't align with the termination of a tenancy if the property manager is not happy with what they're seeing at those routine inspections. So now that they've been removed, I suppose coming back to now these longer notice periods, these 90-day notice periods, I think because they've kind of changed the whole system, it actually makes a lot of sense now to go, well, there's no point having a 60-day notice in there anymore. They may as well all just be 90 days notice. And what that gives is the renter the most amount of flexibility in terms of picking a vacate date that's going to suit them and getting as much warning that that's happening ahead of time. So they're not kind of left with 2 months to try and find a place. They're now given 3. And the other point that you kind of briefly touched on there was the 14-day counter notice, which is something that's been around since 2021. But it's one of those areas where I think renters and also rental providers were a little bit unclear on how that worked. So it might be worthwhile just explaining how that process works because that won't change. So what that means is that, say, for example, you're selling a property and the property settles on the 1st of July. 90 days before the 1st of July, you need to serve notice on that renter to say, property's now been sold, it's been sold with vacant possession, and we need possession on 30th of June, the day before settlement. What the renter can do the day after they receive that notice is provide a counter notice of 14 days, so 2 weeks, and move out of the property within 2 weeks. That's the power that the renter has once they've received a 90-day notice from the owner or the agent of the owner. And that, again, it's when I talk about flexibility, that gives the renter the ultimate flexibility so they don't have to pay a full 3 months rent up until the 30th of June. They can provide you notice back in April or May and say, I found a place, here's my 2 weeks notice and I'm moving out. So it does give the renter a huge amount of, I suppose, like I said, flexibility. But on the flip side, the rental provider needs to be aware of that and be prepared for a vacancy period if that's going to be the case. So we inform all of our owners when we're providing 90-day notices or what was previously 60-day notices that the tenant has the right and the ability to be able to counter with a 14-day notice, and they may come back sooner than that, the end of the term that's on that notice to vacate. So it's something just to keep in mind. Again, I can see the reasons for it, but there obviously are implications for the rental provider in that, where you may face a couple of months where you're not collecting any rent and the property sits there vacant as well.
That's with sales happens quite a bit. 60-day notice to vacate currently, which will go to 90, and you'll get that 14-day notice come back. It also does apply if property is being sold. We serve a notice of intention to sell. That also opens it up for a renter to give 14 days, regardless if they're on a lease or not. So even if they're on a lease, they've just signed a 12-month lease or they've got 6 months to run, we serve them a notice of intention to sell, which has been around also since 2021. They can then return notice of 14 days and basically end that lease with no penalties. So gives the renter some more sort of flexibility on that. So
Sorry, I know you said we'll go off a tangent a little bit.
Yeah,
I'm going to
go.
just ask a quick question there. What would you recommend from a sales perspective? Would you recommend that a notice of intention to sell is served on the renter and you have a vacant property that you're marketing for sale, or would you recommend to an owner to leave renter in the property and try and sell the property whilst the property's tenanted?
So my default is always, and I say this to clients all the time, my default is always to leave the renter in place, because I think, and this is what I say to clients, a rental property is only that, or it's only an investment property if it's collecting rent. Other than that, it becomes a liability. So if you've got a property where you've got a loan on it, for instance, and we can just play a scenario out. Let's say you've got a property worth $500,000 and you've got a loan over that property, right? And you're getting $2,500 a month. We'll say that's your sort of rent. We serve a notice to vacate on that tenant. Tenant vacates and the property sits there vacant. And it takes us somewhere between 4 to 6 weeks to sell it, plus a settlement period of 60 days. So 3 months, 4 months in a total period. As an owner, you've got, again, $10,000 worth of expenses just in mortgage repayments or missed rent that you're collecting in that period to have the property vacant while we sell it. So my default is always serve the notice of intention to sell and keep the renter in place. As long as there's a couple of things that the property's presented well, the renter's going to be cooperative, which they are in most cases are cooperative, and the property presents well. If we walk through and the property is going to need some work done to it, coat of paint, change of flooring, maybe a bathroom reno, that's going to ultimately add more value to the property for the sale and will outweigh that loss of rental income, then 100% you would just serve a notice to vacate to the tenant and sell it vacant possession. But the default for me is always to go with the tenant still in place. But it's also situational in terms of what's going on in the economy. So during, I know we go back to COVID and stuff, but let's go back to a really low interest rate environment. You just serve a notice to vacate and sell them vacant because it wasn't costing the owners anything to keep the property vacant, right? There was 2% interest, so money was basically free. So it didn't really cost them a lot to keep a property vacant during that period. And look, we've seen it. Cost of living's hit everyone. We've seen a lot of owners, previously that would happy to serve a notice to vacate, stage a property, do work to it because money, there was the pressures weren't there. That's becoming a little bit harder for people to do. So they're looking to us and going, well, hey, can you help us out? They're most likely selling it because there may be some financial difficulties and that type of thing there, or on an investment side. So if we can try and help them minimise that as much as possible, yeah, great. First is default is to leave them, but again, it's situational on the tenant side.
Okay, that's good. That's good to know. Yeah, and I think those sort of considerations are really good, and I think probably people don't necessarily always think about it in that way. So yeah, thank you for that. That was useful.
Sure. Title rules on rent increase notices. So this is something we've been doing for a little while, but it's becoming a little bit more that you're having to sort of do this. So rent increases must be supported with comparable leasing data, so not just current listings. So tenants will also have 30 days to contest a rent increase notice and may escalate it to VCAT if they find fit. So credit to the portals, realestate.com domain, for capturing the lease data, because that's essentially what you've got to go off. So this is probably more coming in line with a sales, appraisal sort of thing. You look at currently what's on the market, you look at what's sold data to work out your pricing. The same is going to go with rentals. The only thing that I question on this is how accurate that lease data can be. So I know that the portals are trying to capture it, but and look, it should be with the one kind of a couple of points before we spoke about with getting rid of the rental bidding, but in a declining market or a market where it may be a little bit harder to lease properties, how do you actually know if a property is being leased for the advertised price? So if it's advertised for $500 a week, but we've leased it for $480 because of that was an offer that they put forward or whatever it may be, then how is that then getting captured in the back end so that we can able to appraise it at that price, or are we appraising it at that 500 that it was last advertised for? So that's my only thing. I know I've sort of probably jade off a little bit there, but that would be my only question to that part, is how we've really got to make sure the data that's being provided to us. So we use Ignite, which is a part of REA, so realestate.com. So we've got to trust that data they're providing us on the lease side is true and accurate.
Just one comment on that. I think what's actually happened since we've produced this is that interpretations have also come into play as well.
Okay.
And this may have been a result of perhaps a VCAT hearing that's happened and all the rest of it. So I suppose one thing to people listening to this podcast is whenever you're unsure about these things, refer to the Consumer Affairs website, because Consumer Affairs very regularly update the website in terms of their interpretation of different pieces of legislation and things that are happening.
Mm-hmm.
So the latest interpretation, and I'm not sure when this is updated because they don't show when the site was updated, that it's actually invalid, or it's going to be invalid, to include words along the lines of all properties in the same building have been leased between and a price range or based on the rental market valuation. This is the rental price.
Mm-hmm.
What we can do, and this will be obviously subject to us doing our own investigations as well before these particular reforms come in next month, is that the next rental increase can increase in line with statewide rental increases, not specific to the suburb or to the building, or they're in line with the CPI. So if there's a 2% CPI, then we can increase rent by 2%, or there can be fixed rental increases included in a rental agreement. So, for example, if you've got a 2-year rental agreement, you can actually schedule rental increases throughout the term, obviously in line with the minimum periods that you can serve rental increases on. So you'll have a rental increase, say of $20 per week on the second year. But from what I can tell at the moment, and I'm scrolling through the website as we're talking, it looks as though that even the leased data might not be what we're having to base rental increases from, and I suppose that's a really good point from what we're dealing with as agents, is that the information is so rapidly changing, and it's when you produced this a month or two ago,
3 to 4 weeks ago, yeah.
And the advice and the guidance has already changed, right? So that's the, I suppose, the challenges. And again, if we're kind of stressing the importance of dealing with a professional agent, these are the sorts of things that we keep on top of regularly. And for an owner to be able to keep on top of these and try and manage these or wade through these changes themselves, I can't imagine how you do this as well as kind of look after the property yourself. So I think perhaps in a future podcast we'll probably provide a bit more of an update specifically on that one there, because it looks like Consumer Affairs interpretation of that one there in particular
has changed again
to shift.
Yep. Which I think we kind of guessed, right?
Yeah.
There's been push from parts of the governing bodies and other areas that are been pushing towards a rental cap and all that type of stuff, which happens around the world in other cities. We've kind of assumed and guessed that that's where we're sort of going with it.
Yep.
If that's sort of what the Consumer Affairs website is kind of saying, is that we're going towards a CPI sort of increase, that doesn't really give us any surprise, right? We're pretty, yeah. Any more on that particular one?
No, I think that's probably something that we come back to in a future podcast and provide a bit more detail on.
And then minimum standards. So minimum property standards. There's certain things that we have to do. And I think you've got your the Consumer Affairs checklist there of what minimum standards are. So I'll get you to sort of run through that. So this is the properties before advertised now. It's been that you could advertise a property that didn't meet minimum standards but then had to meet minimum standards once the lease was entered into. So there are some minimum standards now there's a number of minimum standards now that we have to, that a property has to meet even before we advertise it. So this is also, from an advertising perspective, critically important that we are, from us, making sure that we're taking new photos. We're making sure that our photos are not showing something that may not meet minimum standards. So, if there's a kitchenette that has cooking facilities now, but when we took the photos may not have cooking facilities, making sure that that's removed, and that's going to put also owners at risk as well as agencies at risk and agents. So that's just something compliance. Before you're advertising a property, hey, does it meet minimum standards? One, physically when you walk through it, but two, when you're advertising online. So there are a few. If we want to maybe run through them, I don't know if we have to go through them all in exact detail, but maybe pick out a few.
Fly through them, and then if there's questions on them, maybe dig into the detail. So some that are really straightforward, like a bathroom. If for bathrooms, a property's bathroom must have a sink, a shower, or a bath.
Yep.
So a sink and either a shower or a bath, and have hot and cold water.
Yep.
Things that some of these minimum standards you just kind of look at and go, well, if you didn't have these things, I don't know how you're calling it a home. But there's others that are probably a little bit more surprising and not surprising, but a little bit more onerous on owners to be able to demonstrate. Electrical safety, obviously rental properties, and this has been a requirement for a couple of years now, they need to have a modern switchboard with circuit breakers. So those old switchboards with the ceramic fuses, you haven't been able to have those for a number of years. They need to have circuit breakers and the ability to kind of have a safety switch or isolation.
Yep.
So that needs to be upgraded, and that has to have been done for quite some time. Lighting, so internal rooms, corridors, and hallways must have access to working lights. So again, you'd expect that that's the case. Mm-hmm. And at night there should be sufficient artificial light. When they say sufficient, it's difficult to kind of say, but as long as there's lights in a property, then that should be okay.
Yep.
The kitchen must have a property with a kitchen must have a cooking and food preparation area, a sink in good working order connected to hot and cold water, and a stovetop in good working order that has at least 2 burners. Mm-hmm. Again, that's probably something that shouldn't come as a surprise. One thing to note here, and with the changes that are coming, is that the property, so previously the minimum standards applied to properties, you need to make sure that the property complied with the minimum standards as a renter moves in.
Mm-hmm.
So you could advertise a property that didn't necessarily meet the minimum standards, but you couldn't move a tenant into that property until it met the minimum standards. So sometimes if a property was in the tail end of a renovation or a modification or something like that, you'd be advertising the property because you knew in a week or two's time that it would be ready to lease. Whereas now you can't even advertise a property until it is 100% complete and ready to go. Mm-hmm. Highlight an example of that. We had a property that was it was actually previously a hotel room, and it's been converted into a studio apartment. In that particular hotel room, it didn't have cooking facilities, so it didn't have a working kitchen. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the minimum standards require all those 3 things. So food preparation area, sink with hot and cold water, and a stove. This property actually didn't have a stove installed because of being a hotel room. It met the other requirements. It was advertised like that. And we actually received a letter from Consumer Affairs reminding us that a tenant or a renter could not move into the property until it met the minimum standards. The change is that had we advertised that property next month, in November,
the 25th,
then the owner and ourselves would be up for some pretty significant fines in the tens of thousands of dollars for doing that. So you just need to make sure that any properties that are being advertised are ready to go and meet those minimum standards. Mm-hmm. And our property managers are fully aware of what they are and have these checklists on their desktops to be able to put through them just before advertising a property. Mm-hmm. But also just we need to be very conscious about the photos that we're using to advertise properties as well, to make sure that they're being updated if it's representing what it used to look like. The next one is laundry. So if there is a laundry, in some cases there might not be a laundry in the specific property, particularly some of our older style walk-ups. They might have a communal laundry or something like that. Mm-hmm. But if there is a laundry in the property, it must be connected to hot and cold water and a reasonable supply. Locks, external entry doors must have functional deadlocks. Again, shouldn't be a surprise, but that's the way they are. Deadlocks, obviously, for additional security, and that people can unlock with a key from the outside. So, again, like a normal lock can function. One thing that you need to keep in mind there, I suppose, is more digital locks and the impact they might have. Some properties have had digital locks installed, which don't allow you to use a key. They wouldn't be allowed to be used on a rental property. So, just keeping those ones there in mind.
Yep.
We'll go through some of the others. So as we kind of progress through, some of them start getting a little more complicated. I'm going to leave heating and mold and damp probably till the end because they're probably the ones that we'll go through in a bit more detail. Structural soundness, so the property to be structurally sound and weatherproof. I think that speaks for itself. Mm-hmm. How you determine structural soundness, I think, is probably a bit difficult for a property manager wandering through. But for any of those older properties, I think it's probably worthwhile just getting a building inspection just to satisfy ourselves. Mm-hmm. Toilet must be in good working order and connected to sewage or a septic system. So again, no surprises there. All rooms must have adequate ventilation, including the bathroom, shower, toilet, and laundry. That's just making sure that you've got either ceiling fans or windows, or even the vents in the bottom of doors and things like that to make sure that you've got proper cross ventilation so you don't have accumulation of mold in those areas. Rubbish bins and recycling. Rental providers must supply the renter with rubbish and recycling bins. Again, if it's council bins, that's the council requirement to provide those anyway. Mm-hmm. If it's a part of an owner's corporation, sometimes owner's corporation will have separate waste management contracts, so not through council, and most, if not all, owners corporations will have separate recycling and rubbish bins. Mm-hmm. Window coverings. Properties must have curtains or blinds in rooms used for living or sleeping. Again, I think that's pretty standard. I don't know of many properties that wouldn't have blinds in those rooms. Mm-hmm. And all external windows that people can open must have latches. So essentially the ability to lock a window or secure a window. And I think that goes again to the older style properties that, the sash windows that didn't have latches, so you could physically slide them up and down. Yep. So as long as there's some way of being able to secure that from the inside, mm-hmm. And also be left open so that in the event that the renter wishes to ventilate the property, they're able to leave the windows open without them slamming shut. The more significant ones, and I think the ones that we probably deal with and we get the most questions on, are mold and damp. So all rooms must be free from mold and damp caused by or related to the building structure. So that one can be a challenging one for a number of different reasons. One, and maybe this is a topic for a future podcast, but the quality of building construction, particularly newer construction, has meant that water leaks in properties are more and more common. Daily through our property management and owners corporation departments, we're dealing with multiple water leaks that are happening in properties. Mold forms very quickly when water comes into a structure, particularly in plaster and areas where it's in roof cavities and things where there's not a lot of cross ventilation, so the water doesn't dry up quickly and mold very quickly forms. So that one, there's a real challenge because you can have a water leak that's been fixed, but then you need to be able to satisfy yourself that there's no mold there that's still growing or has grown, and what the requirements are in terms of removing that. So I don't know. It's a bit of a challenge. I don't know if you have got any comments on that.
Not really, other than like what you said. It's a daily thing that we're hearing in both PM and OC on that. Well, we've just I went through a property the other day there's no water leak, but the apartment is riddled with mold, and it's more comes down to a ventilation issue. It's a ground floor apartment, so it's not as if there's it's a top floor, so it's going there, and it's just the ceiling right through the living area from like basically the front door to the back door. So it's really hard to determine how that happens. We're not builders, right? Or engineers, so it's hard to comment on how that sort of stuff works. But I think part of it sometimes can be these apartment buildings, to their credit, are so well built in terms of like insulated and tight that you don't have airflow to them, because it's literally to get your Energy Star ratings and that you've got to double glazed windows and seals on doors and all that, which is great. But at the same time, you do need to be able to open things up, let them breathe, let them air. So that's the only thing I could probably add to that part of it. So yeah, that's there was a couple other ones.
Yeah, sorry. So just quickly on mold and damp as well. I think, as I mentioned, I'd like to kind of jump into that in a bit more detail and the issues that it creates. But I think, if you're aware of mold and damp, bring it up as soon as possible. And that applies for everyone. So if you're a renter in a property and you notice that there's a small water leak, don't just leave it and hope that it's going to go away, because it often, never does. Yep. So we want to jump on it as quickly as we possibly can, so that we can find the source, stop the source, and then rectify any mold that's potentially built up or any staining that's built up.
Yep.
And similarly, if you're an owner of a property and we're contacting you and saying that there's water leak, know that we need to treat it with as much care and speed as we possibly can, because the longer these things go on, the worse, the higher the risk of mold, and then all of a sudden the property's doesn't meet the minimum standards, and you find yourself in a bit of a situation. So
might be a special guest episode,
possibly. So on to the last one, which is heating. So this one here was a bit of a interesting one. They've kind of kept moving the goalposts on this, and I think it's probably because of the cost associated with meeting this one here. It's still currently only only need a 2-star rated or above energy efficient heater in a property. There was a move to having air conditioning in properties, and that should have already come into effect, but that's now been pushed back, I believe, to
1st of March 2027.
Yeah, so I think the reason for that is just purely the cost associated with it. There's still a bunch of government grants available on that, so I'd encourage rental providers to look at what government grants are available to them and see what there is. There's a whole range of different grants, from converting from a gas system through to these electric, more efficient electric ones. Where the property doesn't have an air conditioner, being able to swap out the gas ducted heating unit or an old panel heater into a to a split system heating and cooling system. So I think knowing that there's those additional benefits in place, and knowing that it's coming on the 1st of March 2027, which I can't see them pushing back any further, because I think they've kind of already pushed it out a couple of times now. Again, rental providers, get on top of that now, get ahead of it, whether it's in between tenancies or, you see an opportunity to do it, get it done now, and at least that's one less thing to worry about.
Yep.
And obviously it creates for a healthier environment for the renter, and it also helps assist with things like mold and damp too, because a lot of those new energy efficient split systems help with ventilation. So they've got drying modes and things like that. So if there is a bit of damp that builds up in those cooler months, you're able to get that absorbed with one of those condenser systems. So yeah.
This is jumping ahead. So we're going to sort of do this in a couple of episodes' time, and probably something we're going to send out in the new year, but we might as well just touch on it now. So energy efficiency and standards for rentals. So this is the one that's coming in 2027. So I know this is completely off what's coming in now. So this is what the stuff that's coming. So from the 1st of March 2027, when a heating and a hot water system, and again, we say this as of the 3rd of October 2025, so this could change tomorrow or next week. So we'll timestamp it as that. Also timestamps on how quick Scandic can get this video back to us and you can get it out. So pressure's on you guys. When heating and a hot water system reaches life end, it must be replaced with an energy efficient system, so such as a reverse cycle heating or an electric heat pump. And then starting from a new agreement or when a property switches to periodic cooling, fixed energy efficient cooling system must be installed in the living area. Ceiling installation, so where there is no installation existing, ceiling installation with an R value of 5 must be installed, and all shower heads must be upgraded to a 4-star WELS rated model. Now that could be a word, but anyway, I'll just spell it out. But anyway, it's all in caps in this piece of paper. And then from the 1st of July 2027, at the start of a new rental agreement or when a property switches to periodic draft proofing, so external doors, windows, wall vents must be sealed to prevent drafts and loss of heat. So yeah, that's that one. And then the last one, which is the 1st of July 2030. So we're talking 5 years, the better part of 5 years. Applies to all rental agreements, new or existing. Cooling, an energy efficient fixed cooling system must be installed in living areas, no exceptions. Now, you're the OC manager. We've got a number of buildings that don't have cooling systems in there and don't even have balcony areas. So I know a couple of buildings in the city, 238 Flinders Street pops to mind, 268 Flinders Street also pops to mind. You're the owner's corporation manager of one of these buildings. How are you guys talking about this with committees? Is it being thought out? What are we doing?
Very good question. Short answer is no. And again, the reason why it's no is because there hasn't been, in my opinion, there hasn't been any consultation with the industry from an owner's corporation perspective about how this would be possible. If you're talking about retrofitting air conditioners in properties where there is no balcony and there's no real external wall access, and this is a split system air conditioner. So the whole idea of a split system air conditioner is that you've got a head unit inside that has a condenser over it. It sucks the air in from the inside. It runs it over the heat sink or whatever the panel is that has the coolant running through it, and it either pushes out cold air or warm air based on how the system is being set up. But it also relies on an outdoor unit to be installed somewhere that's preferably outside because it actually pushes out warm air when it's running, and it also usually has water running off it as well, which is the condensation off the panel. That has to be installed somewhere outside. Now, if the building doesn't have space for that, so it might not have enough roof space. So 268 Flinders Street is probably a good example. Sorry to call out a specific building. We don't manage the owners' corporation for that, so it's probably good.
Sorry, I say manager for that.
That's a very highly occupied building. So there's a lot of apartments per floor because they're all studio apartments.
20 per level. It's crazy.
Yep. The footprint of the building is actually quite small as well. So their roof space is going to be really limited. Their roof would probably already be occupied with quite a lot of plant and equipment to run the building. So the idea of being able to install 150 split system units on the roof just wouldn't be possible. And there's no real external because the building's boxed in, so you can't be mounting air conditioning units on the face of the building. So I think the answer there is I actually don't know how that gets approached. And as the owners' corporation, they probably should start thinking about what that should be, particularly in a building like that, which is majority occupied by renters as well. But that's, I think, probably, like I said, the shortcoming of the fact that these rules come into place. And, this one here is, like you said, there's no exceptions. So the 1st of July 2030, there is no exception. So we're 5 years out, less than 5 years out. There really should be consultation with the owners' corporation, or at least, an owners' corporation body or a body that represents owners' corporation or owners' corporations or owners' corporation managers to say, hey, look, this is something you've got to consider and you've got 4.5 years to consider it. So get on with it. Or is there a way of, applying an exemption for a building like that, because it's just not going to be possible.
Yeah.
I don't have the answer to it, but I think it's something that you really do need to be considering. And I think the owners' corporation managers for those buildings that they know where there's going to be limited ability to be able to install these things should start those conversations now and start thinking about how they're going to go about it.
Yeah, clock's ticking, and that can come real quick.
Yeah,
as we've seen with some of the other reforms that have come, like they give you a couple of year lead time. You can bury your heads in the sand, but it's going to come, and you've got to be onto it. Otherwise, yeah. So and I know we've just picked out 2 buildings, and sorry for using those. They might be on the track of sorting it out. We don't know, but it's just those buildings that just spring to mind where they are heritage buildings, or they are a building that was built maybe early 90s or to different building standards. They didn't have to have outdoor spaces or balconies and that type of stuff. So they're limited with their space. I think it's going to be a real challenge, and there's going to be a lot of work from the OC managers and committees on how they work it out.
It's also an interesting one too, because we've got a building in Brunswick that was designed specifically to not have air conditioning.
Oh, interesting.
So that one there, you would essentially be going against a planning permit if you propose to install an air conditioner in that building.
Yeah, right. Okay.
So the building's been designed with really good quality cross ventilation, and it just uses ceiling fans for cooling, and it uses hydronic heating for heating the apartments.
Right.
So in theory, it doesn't meet any of these standards, and it can never meet any of those standards. So we've only just started managing that building, but it certainly triggered something in me after this that I'm going to have to go and speak to that committee and say, look, what are the considerations that need to be made here? Do we need to speak to the to Consumer Affairs or a government body to say, look, this building's been specifically designed in this way, and there's clearly been no consideration made in that. It actually stands as a bit of a cornerstone, that building, in terms of sustainability and what it's offering to the kind of the built environment. So the fact that it's not going to meet, well, it doesn't currently meet the energy efficiency standards, and it's certainly not going to be able to meet the 2030 standards. If it's going by what the planning permit was, then I don't know how that goes.
Watch your space.
Yeah.
And then the last one is the data protections. So fees for rental applications and payment methods such as background checks or payment for platform surcharge will be banned. I don't think we've ever done that.
No, there's a few providers going around which we've never subjected our clients to, but where they'll make agents and in theory owners pay for rental applications as they're coming through. It's not something that we've ever asked our clients to do, and it's not something that we sign up to. Mm-hmm. And the second is payment methods as well. There's a couple of products on the market where people can use their credit cards to pay their rent, or they can earn points for paying their rent and all that sort of stuff. But there's obviously a fee associated with paying your rent through that method. Probably a little bit more old-fashioned when it comes to that sort of stuff. We provide BPay. We actually, as the agency, cover the cost of managing the BPay fees.
Yep.
And we know that our clients never have to and never will pay for that service. So from that end, I don't think it really matters, or it doesn't really impact our clients all that much.
This, again, tangent. We've done that specifically to have control over the BPay number, that we're able to direct it, control it. We're not relying on third parties or banks or anyone that's got control over that. So that's why we went down that path. We don't even offer direct debit, but it's worked, and it works really well.
Yeah.
I think it's a great model. You can set up, renters can set up direct debits coming out of their account to that BPay number and stuff like that. So it's on them. It doesn't create anything for the costs for landlords, for bounces and stuff like that. So that's something. Standardised rental applications. This is going to be an interesting one. I haven't seen it. I don't know if they've released it yet, but a standard rental application will become mandatory. So this, I think, is just sort of getting it in line with industry standard across the board. We use there's a program that we use that is through realestate.com that does that. So that's all fine from our end. And then
I think just on that again, there's. With all of these things, different tech companies and those sorts of things try and come in and fiddle with the way in which, I suppose, things have been done. A standardised rental application form is nothing new. When I first started in real estate, and I haven't been around in real estate for a very long time, when I started in real estate in 2016, up in a filing cabinet, and we may even have them still there, were the old style rental application forms, which were a Consumer Affairs approved rental application, that looks very much like a rental increase notice and all the other standard forms that we had that a renter would have to complete. It had a lot more information on there then than what we're able to collect now. It used to have, date of birth and country of origin and all sorts of stuff that you
passport number, rego number,
all those things. You used to have a
Everything.
lot of detail, but that was the form that existed, in the 90s and early 2000s, and probably a lot earlier than that as well.
In the teens.
What's happened is obviously these tech platforms have kind of come in and started introducing these things. I know there's systems out there where you as a renter can go and sign up to making an application through that platform. You might pay for that platform as well, but then they go and do the reference checks for you, and they go and do the employment checks, and it all sits in one central spot. So then you can then fire off applications to agencies who have subscribed to that particular system. We've just always kept it really simple and tried to make it as easy as possible for our renters to apply. You mentioned realestate.com. They've got a really good, solid rental application form that we've been using for probably close to 20 years, I'd say now. Like I can't think of anyone else. At least 10 years.
Yep.
It works. And it works really well. So I would assume, we haven't had those specific conversations, but I would assume that REA, being the size that they are, will be updating that rental application form.
Yep.
And before that comes in, we'll just be getting confirmations that that'll be in line with the requirements of Consumer Affairs.
Yeah. I've been around a little bit longer than you in property management. I remember filling out condition reports on a fold out 3 with a carbon copy underneath it. You would just tick things off. There was no photos. It was just good, fair, bad, and you would just tick it off. And then you'd write comments next to it. You'd give it to the renter when they signed the lease. They had to return it back to the office in 5 days, 7 days after they signed the lease, and that would be a condition report. And it was all on. You'd make little notes on there, and it's like chip on bedroom wall. Which wall? Don't know. There was a chip on the bedroom wall, or there was a stain on the carpet. And then we got our first digital camera, and that was but that was all standardized forms, right? Like that was, we used to get them from Consumer Affairs. They would send them. You'd call them to send a pack through. Same with bond forms. Bond forms were a fillable form that you would send into the RTBA. So again, there was carbon copies. So you'd give the tenant a copy. We'd hold a copy on file. So I think it's just like, we're kind of going back to that with just like standardized forms. Super easy. It's like they've done the same on the sales side. So the statement informations were introduced. Every company that was doing CMAs or was doing them, so your CoreLogics, your Price Finders, all had ones there. Agencies and franchises went and got their own designed statement information because they wanted to look different. And then they just came back and said, we're just going to do standardized form. This is it. And then it just makes it easy. Like, it doesn't have to be, we're real estate agents. We want like things to look pretty and shiny and nice, right? And all branded. Everything has to be branded. So, so it was just, I don't think that's a bad thing at all. And then new limits placed on collecting and storing tenants' personal data. So again, just making sure that it's being disposed of and destroyed. Essentially, you're not keeping it and that type of stuff.
Yeah.
That's again, everything's online, so it's easy to remove and not store any of that sort of stuff on record. Different again, like we used to have paper applications. You'd have a stack of them, everywhere. But you're like, we don't have that. So that's pretty much it. That's pretty easy.
And we digitize all that stuff anyway. So even if there was physical documentations, it all becomes digital. We upload that into our systems, and the platforms that we use are aware of what those standards are in terms of data protection and removal of data once after a certain number of days and those sorts of things as well. So
these changes coming in, that's kind of it from the ones that are coming in November. Anything that surprised you? Anything that's like that you look at and go, this is crazy, or this is because you get people that will look at this and go, oh my god, this is and there's a lot of like back in my day type stuff comes out when reforms and stuff like that come through. I don't know. What are your initial impressions or thoughts on these?
So what I've been saying for a couple of years, probably more than a couple of years now, is that the way the residential rental market is moving is much more like what the commercial rental market has been for a number of years. So if you own a commercial property, there's certain things that you need to do outside of, negotiating rent and signing a lease and those sorts of things. But in terms of essential services maintenance, making sure that you've got paths of egress tested on a regular basis, you're having your fire extinguishers checked and stamped, and any other essential services that are maintained within a commercial property need to be maintained regularly, and you need to maintain evidence of that, because if something goes wrong, then you as the property owner, the commercial property owner, are responsible for it. What's happening with the residential market is very much like that. So it's gone from being an industry that I'm not going to say didn't have any regulation, but the Residential Tenancy Act had some movement in it. So it had some room for negotiation, and things like rental bidding was something that agencies used to do and thought was okay. We'd have varying levels of maintenance on properties, so properties wouldn't necessarily meet the minimum standards, and it wouldn't be something that an owner could necessarily be held to. There was also some owners that probably owned properties that shouldn't have owned properties. I know I can think of a couple in our time where an owner wanted to install or put a camp stove in a property in between having a proper stove installed in their property, because they thought that was okay. So I think what's happening here and what the government's trying to do is really professionalise the industry, professionalise residential rentals, so that they are more a commercial matter, and moving away from it being just how you feel about a certain situation.
Mm-hmm.
Have they gone too far? Look, I think that's really an opinion, and I suppose I don't want to necessarily get caught in that. I think there's some really positive things, and I think a lot of the changes that are being made are they've got a good basis, and I think they're coming from the right place. I think sometimes the legislation's being drafted for that kind of lowest common denominator, so the rental provider who's perhaps trying to move a tenant out with no reason, and because they've got a personal vendetta against them, or wanting to increase the rent to the maximum amount they possibly can all the time. And in our experience, 95% of owners aren't like that. Most owners that we deal with on a regular basis are mum and dad property investors. They've got one investment property because they've worked hard, they've put a bit of money away, and they've gone and bought that property that that they're really proud of, and that they want to maintain well, and they're happy to provide a really great place for their tenant to live. And I think some of these things can really feel like it's a bit of a beat up and all kind of one-sided and against them. But I suppose my advice to those owners is, if you're doing the right things and you're maintaining your property well, and you take care and pride in the property that you're providing for your renters to live in, then there's really not much in here that should scare most property owners away. There's a lot of things in here that I look at and go, well, if that's what it takes to lease a property out in Victoria now, then that's what it takes.
Yep.
So some of the things that are coming, you've talked about draft proofing and including insulation in properties and water rated shower heads. Again, they're all things that I'd want in my own home. So why not have them in these properties? And if it's just an additional step in that direction, then perhaps that's okay.
We're pretty lucky too. Like the properties that we manage, we're fortunate. We're mainly CBD and inner city based apartment buildings that have been built in the last 20 years that have most of these things. So we didn't really have a lot of properties that we had to get complete switchboard upgrades. I reckon I could probably count on one hand how many that I was sort of involved in. Like there wasn't many that we had to do. So I always think, and I always say it, and we talk about it internally. If you're starting work on the 26th of November 2025 in property management, you'd be starting on my birthday, so you'd have cake on your first day when you started. But if you came in on the first day, you would know no different.
Yeah.
Right? This would just be the standard. I think sometimes as agents, as owners, as renters, we can get caught up in what it was like and what the back of it was, the backstory of it was, and how we used to do things, and we spoke about it, and it's good to sometimes look back and have a bit of a laugh about how things were done and how far we've come with it. But and one thing that we've had done ever since we got into business together was focus on what you can do and what you can't.
That's right.
These things we can't control. We have to learn to work within these guidelines and that's essentially what it is. It's just, as you said, we're again blessed with our owners and our landlords. They understand it, they get it, they get on with it, and they do it. If it means that you're going to get, like you said, you maintain your property, you look after the tenant, it means you're going to get a better renter, longer term tenant, have less vacancy periods, you're going to get a better rental income and a better return. And on the tenant side, if your landlord's looking after the property, rental provider's looking after your property, getting onto maintenance, it's got everything that you want in there, then hey, why would you want to move if you didn't have to move? So I think it's all relative. I think it's we'll see what happens. The ones in 2027 and 2030, we'll obviously talk about those more as they come. But I think that's it's a good start. Anyway, anything else you want to cover off on?
No.
What you want to chat about?
No. I just
racehorse that you bought.
No, definitely no racehorses, not just yet. I suppose I just wanted to firstly thank you for actually kicking this off and getting us going on podcast. I'd thank the listeners. Hopefully we have quite a few listeners. I'm hoping I'm hoping that we that this goes pretty wide and look forward to having these chats on a more often, much more regularly and being able to bring you this information and hopefully in a bit more candid way and in a way that people are able to understand and apply to their own situations as well.
I didn't say it at the start, but if anyone wants to have a laugh, real laugh, go back and have a look at the videos that we did during COVID. The first couple that we did, the sheer fear and absolute confusion of having no idea what we were talking about or what we were doing back then, but also like as you know, I love podcasts. I listen to a lot of them in the car. I watch a lot of them on YouTube. So it has been a bit of a thing of mine to do one of these. Well, one was actually trying to get invited on one, but no one would have me on there, so I thought, bugger, I'll start my own. But no, I think it's also we got some really great feedback during that period from a lot of clients that actually were watching them surprisingly and got a lot out of it. Things move so quickly in this industry, and there's always something new that's happening and being done. So there's so much information. It's sometimes hard to get that out quickly or to a large number of people. So we thought this would be a really good way. But this isn't exclusive to real estate clients and owners corporation clients. This is a property podcast for anyone that has a remote interest in property. And we'll try and get some guest speakers on, and we'll try and get some people involved in this along the way that we think are going to contribute to the conversation. And essentially that's what it is. It's a property conversation that we'll have on a regular basis, and hopefully you guys that are watching and listening can get something out of this. And it's going to be exciting to see if we do get one listener, but that'll be we'll start.
What do they say? Subscribe.
Yeah.
The subscribe button.
Click and subscribe. We're going to try and get that. What is it? So you've got to like and subscribe to it. So
we'll get better at that.
We'll get better at that. So Michael wants the gold plaque of all on YouTube. So no, thank you. Thanks, Mike.
I appreciate it.
I think we did okay.
Yeah. Thanks everybody. Thanks for listening.
Thanks so much.